today is the worst AI will ever be. And AI
Yeah.
will only improve from here. And I strongly believe that, right? You probably need somewhat of an engineering background and like somewhat of
Yeah.
a prompt mastery background to build stuff. But I think like a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, like maybe you don't need an engineering background.
Welcome to the Talking AI podcast, where we talk AI with both experts in the field and early adopters. I'm your host, Matt Page, and we're here to demystify AI for you so you can get some value from it. Let's talk some AI. AI is going to change the current SaaS landscape in two major ways. The first one's creating new and novel ways of solving existing problems, existing jobs to be done. And the second one's just building solutions similar to existing products in a way more efficient way, leading to completely different cost structures, potentially entirely new business models. And this episode's really about the latter. And it all started with a tweet from someone that couldn't believe how expensive DocuSign was, and they're desperately looking for alternatives. I'm going to let our guest, Michael Luo, tell the story to all of you firsthand. But a bit of context, Michael is a smart dude. He was previous software engineer at Meta, Zillow, and sold his last company, now working at Stripe on the product side. But welcome to Talking AI, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I don't know if I would consider myself less smart, but I appreciate the compliment there. But yeah, like you mentioned, I saw a tweet from someone named Andrew Wilkinson that was about DocuSign specifically and how much they pay for that. I previously used DocuSign and, I've had a good experience, but I would agree that it's a little bit on the pricier side. And so that kind of inspired me. I was like, DocuSign itself is not super hard to, create a replica of. E-signing tools are not super hard. There are compliance things that you do have to pay attention to, but as long as you pay attention to them and, follow the letter of the law, it's not super difficult, at least in the US. Europe is a little bit different. And so that kind of inspired me. I was like, how easy or hard is it to create, an e-signing tool with AI? So then I kicked off just, a very simple prompt in Lovable. I was like, help me build an e-signing tool. And it got in pretty much like 2 prompts. It got to the bare bones of what an e-signing tool could be. It didn't have authentication or anything like that, but, it had upload a PDF and be able to, sign it. And then I basically took that as a very rough skeleton, very not production ready, right? But then I took that into ChatGPT and Cursor and then added a bunch of features like authentication, sending out emails, being able to, get signing notifications, things like that, and made it production ready. And now it's being used by thousands of users and it's all completely free. And it cost me about $20 a month to run, which is amazing.
Wow, that's insane. And full disclosure, like DocuSign's a great product. You mentioned like the security and serving like those very high-end enterprise clients, but this is just such a big shift and a democratization effect going on. And I didn't realize that you kind of like Lovable a couple prompts and you got like good bare bones right there. It's funny too. So I did a TikTok video on this that went kind of viral, 250,000 views, 7,000 likes, a bunch of shares. But the best part was the comments. So this got a little spicy. So what I did, I took all the comments, I dumped them into ChatGPT. I was like, hey, give me the highlights, give me the interesting ones. And it was really interesting. It was like this polarizing effect of one group of people that were super pumped for like the old guard, folks sitting on top of SaaS Mountain,
Yeah.
to be challenged essentially. And there's phrases like renaissance that somebody coined. And then there's folks on the other side completely dismissing it, talking about, like you mentioned, the security side, compliance, etc. And I don't know if you've heard of this term, but I don't know if this is a new thing, but they called the trend Timuware, essentially like building cheap knockoffs of real things.
Yeah.
And then you had folks on the other side saying AI coding is a joke and will lead to a ton of technical debt, and you get a bunch of AI slop. And I think it's probably true on both sides of the aisle, but like, I'm curious, like, what's your take having gone through this experience? And you're obviously unique because you're an engineer by profession at some big time companies. So what's your thoughts on that? And then I'd be curious, like, what reactions have you gotten similar on, social and whatnot?
Yeah. I think there's truth on both sides, right? Like on the, let's call it like higher end, like enterprise sales side, like I think DocuSign, like obviously has a very robust product, but if I had to venture to guess, I don't know anything about DocuSign, right? But if I had to venture to guess, They probably have a much better enterprise sales motion, a much better enterprise brand. They probably have a lot of customer success slash customer support people helping, I don't know, like the big, let's say Nikes of the world. I'm just assuming Nike
Yeah.
uses DocuSign. I actually don't know. Right. And I don't imagine Nike using, my app, which is like the spring times of the world, right? Like it's very much like a fun side project that could become a business at some point, but I'm not trying to compete with DocuSign for the same types of customers, right? And so I think there is like some truth and validity to that. On the like AI flop side, I would probably agree with that today, right? But I think I saw another tweet, which was like, today is the worst AI will ever be. And AI
Yeah.
will only improve from here. And I strongly believe that, right? And I'll be the first to admit that, again, Lovable, like what it gave me was like not production ready, but it was like a good skeleton, right? Like there were a ton of like exploits. There were like, again, there's no authentication
Mm-hmm.
even. So like anyone could log in as anybody and just send like random contracts. There's it didn't really follow like the compliance, like letter of the law, for example. It didn't give me audit logs until I explicitly prompted Cursor. I was like, hey, give me audit logs so that, I am compliant with, some USA laws, right? And so I think today, like you probably need somewhat of an engineering background and like somewhat of
Yeah.
a prompt mastery background to build stuff. But I think like a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, like maybe you don't need an engineering background. Maybe you don't need to be
Yeah.
very good at prompting. And I think AI will only improve from here.
Yeah. And that's the interesting point too. And we kind of have our methodology. We're defining generative driven development. And we had another guest on, Andrew Miller, super smart guy. And he's kind of like dev turned designer turned product guy. So he's hit this like the triad of
Yeah.
roles. And he has a similar methodology called prompt driven development. But that's the interesting piece. Like the folks that have background and context, because like going down into the syntax and all these things, but it's more about what do you know the right questions to ask,
Yeah.
I think is critical. And it's like I feel like it's that group of product folks that always wanted to build and they worked with development teams. They know like the ins and outs of things, but they never got deep into it. Like I think that's going to be the most empowered group in this whole like shift, because now they can build to their heart's desire, and they're
Yeah.
actually like really good at connecting like user to what they're building, right? The
Yeah.
pain
Yeah.
point and whatnot.
Yeah. And I think to add on to that, like maybe to be even more concrete, I think what these AI tools have product market fit for is like creating prototypes. And whether you believe or anyone believes
Yeah.
that is slop or not slop, that's your opinion. I personally don't believe prototypes are slop because even though they might be like bad code or whatever, they're like the first iteration of your product, right? And maybe you're just looking to get feedback and then
Hmm.
you have more confidence to go build V2, or maybe you're building a prototype to raise the money so that you can go build V2 or whatever, right? And so I think like prototypes are valuable. And I do think that prototypes are like how we get to something that is more production ready, let's say 2 years down the road, right? And I think just a natural stepping stone. And yes, I would generally agree that there is like some slop today, but I think the slop it has to be a stepping stone to more production ready stuff down the road.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example from my own side. I'm doing this workshop. It's actually tomorrow, but when this goes out, it'll be in the past, but it's with a nonprofit local here in Atlanta called Open Hand. So they do meals for, less fortunate or elderly, things like that. So I saw Weight Watchers. They had created this thing where you could take a picture of like your food, your meal, and it, tell you how many points it is using AI. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I started with ChatGPT, where I just gave it a photo and said, hey, give me the breakdown of the nutrition in this. And it was able to do it. And then I kept going a bit deeper. And then I found this API called is the Nutrient IX or something, completely free. And it actually has all this nutrition details. So I was like, okay, well, maybe just for a demo in the workshop, let me just go through this in Lovable. And I did very similar to you, like just a few lines. And it came up with something beautiful to start.
Yeah.
And then I was able, just through prompting, able to hook up with OpenAI on the API side. And then I integrated with that nutrition API. So it like you could drop in a Pinterest recipe or take a picture of your food. AI would do this, basically identify what it is, then it would feed it to the nutrition IX thing. And, just kind of a random thing. And I built it in, a couple hours. And then I came across this tweet here for those on YouTube. There's this company called Cal AI. It's essentially the same concept. It's 4 people It's now doing 12 million in ARR, right? So it's
Yeah.
almost this shift I think that's going to happen. And this person here, Ben Lang, says, we've entered the era of tiny teams. The list keeps going. First time coming across some of these, and it just gives you this list of several companies that are doing pretty insane numbers with, anywhere from 4 to, what's the biggest one on there? 16 people,
Yeah.
right? What's your thoughts on that side, this concept of the tiny team? And then I think that's what gets interesting with like incumbents too, because the cost structure is just completely different, which could
Yep.
be a completely different business model that
Yep.
it leads to as well.
Yeah, I fully buy into tiny teams, right? Like maybe for some context, as I build Springtime, my free e-sign tool, it's just me. And I probably put in 2 to maybe 4 hours a week on
Yeah.
building out, like specifically using prompts and building out features. Like pretty much 99% of my code is AI generated, right? And I only put 2 to 4 hours and I can easily churn out anywhere from 2 to 5 features. Like this past week, I was only able to churn out one feature, but it was a pretty big feature, right? That was like a really big new feature that a bunch of users have been asking for. And so I definitely believe that there is like tiny teams, right? Because I'm
Mhm.
almost like the product manager, right? Talking
Yeah.
to users, figuring out what to build. Then I can directly translate that into like requirements, aka a prompt. And then so I'm now the software engineer, right? And then I'm also kind of like designer because now I have the solution in my head. Like I just need to go, prompt it out, so to speak,
Yeah.
what the user experience might look like. And so I think I do agree with tiny teams. And I think to piggyback on that, I think there will be a lot more people who don't just take on a predefined software engineering role or a predefined
Mhm.
designer role. And I think roles will be like talking to customers and then designing it and then implementing it. And I think that will be like all one person, right? And then I have some thoughts on the cost structure, but maybe I'll let you comment on that.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get to the cost structure. I'm curious there, but like what you're talking about the roles, what do you see the team of the future being? And you hinted on it a little bit, but it's almost don't need massive teams of engineers with specific specializations in every case. Where instead you may just have a really good generalist paired with AI, they can do a lot more. I don't know. What do you think happens? Because there's a lot of people saying, "Oh, software engineering's dead." I don't believe that. I think there's
Yeah.
a role for people to build things. I just think like the way you approach doing it is going to like foundationally change.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I do think there's like a subset of software engineers, the ones working on groundbreaking stuff or, NASA
Yeah.
type of software that I think will be
Hmm.
hard for AI to replace just because it does not have much training data on like NASA's code or like the future of frontier AI models,
Yeah.
right? But I do think that's like a subset, maybe we'll count that as, I don't know, 10% of all software engineers. And I think there's
But
like
I
the
don't
other,
know. Like you look at it too, and this may be a side transition, but like Aider, I don't know if you know that AI coding tool. I saw a stat today. It's like some large percent of the code being made for Aider is actually being generated with AI. What was it? Gumroad, same thing. All their codes generated with AI.
yeah,
You had Claude, the CEO coming out saying, "Oh, and was it 6 or 12 months? Everything's going to be generated by AI." But I guess
yeah.
that's more the function and less of the role, though, in a
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. And so I think that's like the other 90% of code. And I think, what's the right way to describe this? I think AI is a tool, but it doesn't directly replace like a software engineer, right? And maybe I'll give you
Hmm.
some like good examples. Like I think software engineers make business trade-off decisions, right? A good example
Yeah.
is, hey, do we want to, like, as we scale, do we want to, like, are we okay spending X amount of time refactoring this code, rewriting it to be more performant,
Hmm.
or should we just spend a bunch of extra money and just pay for a bunch of extra servers, right? And that's like very much a business decision
Yeah.
that software engineers have like a lot of input into because they're the ones who understand the most to make the decision, right? And I feel AI, as it is today, again, I think it could change like down the road, but I think AI has a harder time because it doesn't have as much business context, right? But I do think based off of the decision, let's assume that engineers, let's go down path A, then you can prompt the AI to be like, hey, help me execute or write code or do whatever path A is, right? But I think software engineers still understand a lot of the business and technical trade-offs that it's hard today for a for an AI to like deeply understand and have all the context of.
Yeah. Mm.
With that being said, I do think as my code base gets a little bit bigger, there start to become a little bit more bugs. And I think I tweeted the
Yeah.
other day, there was a bug that like was really hard for my AI to, so the AI wrote the code, which had a bug, and then I used AI to debug it. And it was just like, it didn't know how to debug it. And it kept writing code that did not fix the issue. And as a
Yeah.
software engineer, I was like, oh, I know, like, this is my process. I literally told it console.log and output everything that you would need to debug this. And then it, updated the code. And then I, manually ran through it, copied and pasted all the logs, and then be like, now help me debug it. Right. And that was an example where the AI actually needed guidance from, I like to think of myself
Yeah.
as a more advanced software engineer than just an AI. And I think it needed some guidance. Right. And so sometimes it can be really smart and be like a really senior engineer. And sometimes it can be really dumb and be, it can be laser focused on what it thinks is the right solution. And sometimes it's actually wrong and it needs help, like getting guidance. And so I think that was a great example. Now, obviously, I think in the next 6 to 12 months, that'll improve a lot. But yeah.
I think it's the example you said earlier. This is the worst it's going to be at this point. It's, I tell my wife that all the time. This is
Yeah.
as good a looking as I'm going to be. It's only going down from here, right? But it's that same kind of thing. And, so I want to get into this, like your current, call it approach methodology for how you're interacting with AI. And you hinted on it a little bit where you were kind of like prototyping with Lovable. You mentioned some requirements with ChatGPT, but I don't know if you've thought about this kind of thoughtfully. What are some of the key approaches, tactics, or things you do when you're working with AI? Say the different phases. We're at early like ideation, concepting to, hey, I got something that's real. I want to build new features. And you kind of gave the, bug fixing example, but talk me through that, especially, when you're going from a Lovable to a Cursor. And I think some people get confused there. It's, why am I using two different ones? They
Yeah.
kind of have their own unique benefits.
Yeah. So I would say Lovable is like really good for like front end web app
Mhm.
stuff. And it's good to get started. Again, I don't think, at least from my experience, it wasn't great at like turning something like super production ready. And I would then prompt it. I would then take that code and then prompt it in ChatGPT or Cursor to get it like super production ready and then walk you through some examples, right? My second tip is I think O1 is like the best. So as from my experience, and Cursor doesn't support O1 with their $20 a month plan. And so a lot of times I would literally just copy and paste my code from Cursor
Yeah.
into ChatGPT, which does have O1 with the $20 a month plan. So I pay for all of them, right? And maybe it's a concrete example. I try to prompt and give as much detail with a very focused feature set, right? So and I try to give it as much context as I possibly can. So as an example, there was a feature where like today you can add, maybe I can just share my screen and show.
Yeah, go for it. Let's get
Cool, cool.
for those on YouTube, they'll get a chance to check it out.
Yeah.
Those on audio, we'll kind of
Yeah.
verbalize
So,
as we go.
so today you can upload a PDF, like I'm going to like an important contract. And so
Yep. Look at this.
yeah, before you couldn't drag and drop and reposition these fields, right? So,
Yeah.
so obviously today you can, but you couldn't drag and drop and reposition. You'd have to click X and then, re-add it. And so obviously a feature request that I got was like, hey, I want to be able to drag and drop and reposition like I can here, right? And
Mhm.
with my prompts to ChatGPT, I would be like, okay, some context of what I'm building. I am building an e-sign tool where someone can upload a PDF, yada, yada, add some fields. Then the second part of my prompt, I would say, this is the functionality today. So functionality today, people can add a signature field. They can also delete it, right? And then the third part, I would add the user problem. So the problem is people want to, reorder the field. Maybe they accidentally place the signature field, or maybe they want to move it like 5 pixels down, and deleting it and re-adding it isn't as good. And then the fourth piece of the prompt is like the solution, which is help me build a drag and drop, way to reposition these fields. And it's like
Yeah.
very detailed, right? And I think the biggest call out here is I like sit down. This is like the human part, right? I sit down, I think through what the right user experience is, and I give the AI all the context of what I'm building, what the problem is, what the code looks like today, and what the functionality is, and what I want it to do and update the code to do, right? And I think that is like the most helpful for the AI.
And that's such a foundational thing. Like And for folks listening, you need to internalize this. Something you said a little bit ago was you go very deep on context, but very focused in terms of what you're building. Like you don't want to go say, build this entire big thing. It's very like focused in terms of the scope you're building. And context can be exactly what you just talked about, like problem solution, examples, screenshots, code, all kinds of different things. And something I've done too that I've found to be helpful is a lot of people will jump directly to, go build the thing, even if they're providing a ton of context. But what I'll do when I'm building something a lot of the times, especially if it's something new and not just a small iteration on something, I'll actually explicitly tell whatever IDE or tool I'm in, do not write any code. Let's just have a conversation about this.
Yeah.
And there's that conversation that you have is just beautiful context for AI to go do what you want it to
Yeah.
do. And it can provide you feedback and thoughts. And that's the thing I like to tell people. It's like there's this concept of known knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns. It can surface some of those unknown unknowns you're not even thinking about.
Yep.
But that's another way to iterate,
Yeah.
with
I
less
100%,
bugs, I guess.
I 100% agree with that. And I think two of my favorite questions to ask the AI before it writes any code, to your point, is ask any clarifying questions to help you. And then the second thing is state any assumptions that you're making, right? And then I clearly can
Yes.
understand, okay, you are making this assumption about the code or the product or the user experience. And then, maybe we have different assumptions and then maybe I can correct it on the next prompt.
Yeah. Because you know what AI is? I can't remember who came up with this analogy, but it's like the smartest intern you ever came across in the sense that like they're very eager to do the thing and they don't want to ask you, hey, but like, where is this? I'm just going to go try and figure it out. It's very much like that. Like you almost have to give it permission to ask you those clarifying questions in a sense.
Yeah.
But let's go a bit deeper now. It's maybe kind of tangential, but do you play with like cursor rules at all? Or have you gotten into the MCP stuff, anything like that? Or I guess I'll pause there and then I got a couple other just curious questions on
Yeah,
the
I mean,
cursor.
I've played around with MCPs a little bit. I think my hot take is I think MCPs are overhyped in the short term. And
Yeah.
by short term, I mean like the next 1 to 6 months. But I think they're underhyped long term, like in the next 2+ years. And I think the main reason is because I think like MCPs are just like a standard. And I think why they are overhyped is it's just like a very simple API. Like it's barely a tool, right? And like you still have to tell it how to use the tool and like what to use the tool for. And that's the context that you give the prompt. And so I think like it will be powerful once AI, or obviously once we have more MCPs and more tools to use, right? But once also AI and we get comfortable with telling the AI when to use the tool and how to use the tool. And then I think the third powerful unlock will be like once it just knows how to do everything automatically. And I think that will come once the context is really large and it can fit all of these MCP tools. Stripe has an MCP tool, shameless plug, I don't know, like other MCP
What does the
tools.
Stripe one do?
I believe it's a good question. I actually haven't played with the Stripe one, but I believe you can like do some payments. And I at the very minimum, I know we have like docs. We've MCP'd our docs, I believe. And so you kind of have access to that via like Cursor or something. But I believe we're doing something around like agentic payments too.
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now. So so what is it? Interact with the Stripe API. So looks like there's some different tools.
Yeah.
I'll give you a good example of one that I like. And it's to your point, like it's very basic and simple. And I think it's called browser tools. But to your point earlier with taking the console logs and whatnot, copying and pasting them into the chat, it basically is able to see your console log. So you're not having to do that very just minor copy paste step. So it's like a minor thing, but it's nice. It's nice to have in a sense. So I think it'll evolve a lot there.
Yeah.
So I think the other piece too, I've noticed like when chat conversations get very long, like it'll start to, hallucinate a little bit more. The context window is getting too long for it to work. So a lot of times, you open a new chat. So any thoughts on like when do you determine when to open a new chat? And I think the other piece too is like we've talked a lot about context.
Yeah.
When do you actually explicitly say, okay, here are X files that relate to the thing we're going to do versus just allowing, whatever IDE you're using to just kind of know what files it needs to update and interact with.
Yeah. So I scope my chat windows to basically be about a specific feature, right? And I think the upside is the chats don't get like, honestly, most of my features can be done anywhere from 1 to 5
Yeah.
prompts, right? I think that's like the upside where it's like very focused. The AI only has the context that it needs and nothing else. The downside is every time you open up the new chat window, it like loses a lot of context. So
Yeah.
I actually have a bank of prompts in like Notion that like I can easily reference and like copy and paste based off of whatever feature. So if I need to
Yeah.
reference, this drag to drop feature, like I have a prompt bank, so to speak, kind of saved, and that helps me move a little bit faster. But yeah, I think chat windows, I try to create new ones very liberally. And I think the second part of your question is around, do I choose the context and the files? I
Yeah, because you can
generally,
add context and files and whatnot.
yeah.
And, I go back and forth because I'm not an engineer by
Mm,
trade. So I'm almost hesitant to do it because I'm like, okay, I know it's this file, but there may be some other file I'm not
yeah.
considering that it should be impacting and it might
Yeah.
gonna
So
confuse it.
I think in the beginning of any product, when you don't have very many lines of code, I think it's probably safe to not pre-select files or lines or whatever. But I think maybe for context, like my code base is now thousands of lines of code. That's
Yeah.
also because AI doesn't write very efficient code, but that's, a separate
Yeah.
story. And so I not only select the files and I very specifically say, hey, this function in this file, take a look at the behavior here. I will even select lines within cursor and pass that into the context. So it's
Hmm.
very
Yep.
specific, right? Because I've generally found that the more pointed you are with your questions, the better the AI will know and have better
Yeah.
performance, obviously, right? And the more just garbage context you throw it or unrelated context you throw it, the more it has to make guesses and assumptions.
Yeah, totally. And I think the one thing for people to take away there, I love that simple way you described it. Just create a new chat when you're working on a new feature, but keep those iterations small in nature. And you mentioned the thing about AI not really caring about, so I got a couple of things for you. AI not caring about how long the code base is. I don't know if you've noticed in Lovable, but they'll actually proactively say, hey, this file's getting large. It's, 250, 500 lines. We should consider refactoring it. And it's literally click a button and it refactors it, which is kind of like unnerving because you're just blindly letting it refactor it. But I did that on a couple iterations. It seems to like work okay in a sense. I don't know if that's something that you kind of proactively do because Cursor obviously is not proactively doing that. Or just curious your thoughts on that feature in Lovable and some of these more user friendly IDEs.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned because I have a 900 line file of code on Springtime,
Mhm.
and I was like, I think it's time to refactor it because it was like getting very unwieldy for both me and the AI to
Yeah,
look at, right? I think what's scary to me is like that point where, you just trust the AI to refactor everything.
yeah,
I think the second point is I would then need to go test. And I just don't, I honestly would spend more time testing that refactor than I would just, writing another prompt. And so I decided like I will not accept the file changes because I wasn't 100% confident. And
yeah,
because I'm not 100% confident, I would need to take the time to go test. And I think like the third thing is I think yes, one file is like very unwieldy to work with, but I think it's even more unwieldy when you have 5 different files and AI just kind of chooses
yeah,
like where to put things. And you might not know where everything is, and you might not know how AI kind of like refactors the code for you. And so I actually spent maybe 30 minutes like trying to refactor and like making a decision, should I refactor or not? And I ultimately chose not to refactor. Now it's biting me in the butt because like I obviously am moving a lot slower, and maybe I should just pay that one-time cost to refactor and, do that testing. But right now I'm taking on that tech debt.
yeah. No, that's interesting. I'll give you one other thing that I've started playing around with, which seems to work okay. And you mentioned the thing when you go to a new chat, right? You kind of lose context. You got to almost like prime the AI pump
Yeah.
to let it know where it's at. But I've started doing this where in the beginning, you mentioned like a PDR or product requirements document, PRD, that you're creating in ChatGPT or wherever. I've started actually adding that as a file in the project directory. So you can then reference to that requirements doc and say, hey, here's our requirements. And then I've also had it create a project plan. But what's interesting is you can do it in Markdown and have whatever tool you're using, Cursor or whatever, intentionally check off the things as it goes. And this is where like the Cursor rules come into it. You can say, hey, when you're done with something, go check it off. So it like gives you this quick hack to show A, what are we building? And then B, where are we? And then what's the next step? And obviously you can update requirements in the plan as you go.
Yeah.
But that's been kind of like an interesting, I guess, workaround for the
Yeah, I
content.
think that's smart. I think I remember I like asked AI to build a PRD for me, and I think it was almost too verbose, where it would
Yeah.
like, walk through everything. And I think something that's good. I think for me, I was like, I'm like probably never gonna look at this ever again, and I would rather just
Yeah.
like type it all out every time because then it's like more fresh in my mind. And
Yeah.
there is the cost, obviously, of typing it out, or I keep again a prompt bank within Notion, and there is that cost. But I feel like for me, it's better to like I guess I guess I don't want to be AI lazy, right? And I feel, for
Yeah.
better or for worse, keeping everything the PRD and letting AI write the PRD for you is like being AI lazy. And I want to be like AI lazy, but like code or sorry, I want to be like PRD not lazy, but code lazy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That does make sense. And I think so. Last thought here, and then I do want to get into like your thoughts on SaaS pricing, all those kind of
Yeah.
things to wrap us up. But I keep, this topic like vibe coding keeps coming up, and the topic of like requirements and how you're iterating through that. I feel like that process is going to change because, in a very traditional sense, before we started using these tools, it would be define the requirements, the epics, BA or product persons like writing user stories, engineers picking up the user stories. You're kind of intentionally planning in these, 2-week sprints or whatnot. But when I'm working on project, it just feels completely different. And I don't know what the change is, but it feels like it's just going to be different in terms of how you work in the future. A, because it's a lot faster and more efficient. And I don't know if you need that same process in there. I think the heart of it still stays, but so I don't know if you've thought about that at all or any thoughts in
Yeah, I
building
thought
in
about
larger
that.
teams.
And I think maybe I'll say AI today is really good for brand new projects, like spinning something off the ground
Yeah.
because there's no context, right? I think the key concept here is like how much context is there. And I think it probably feels a little bit different because like when you spin something off the ground, like you yourself, you have all the context and there's no past previous context, past previous decision. Now, maybe I'll contrast that with I'm a product manager at Stripe and I work with a lot of engineers at Stripe, right? And I think there is a lot of past context and even a lot of just like code
Yeah.
context that you can't fit into AI. Like I actually tweeted this earlier this week. I think right now software engineers have a human software engineer has one defining factor, which is like it can hold way more context than an AI software engineer. And yes, I
Yeah.
think that will change at some point. But like a good example is like at Stripe, when we go build like a new feature, it has to go work with a bunch of our other products. Like, for example, we have
Hmm.
subscriptions, we have Stripe Tax, we have, discounts within the Stripe product catalog, we have, a bunch of other features within Stripe. And some human today has all the context of how, Stripe's payments APIs work with subscriptions, how Stripe payments APIs work with Stripe Tax, right? And so if we just let an AI go loose, the AI would have no context on those other products, on their past decisions, on
Hmm.
how things should work well with I'm just making this up. I don't know the real number, but let's say like millions of lines of code at Stripe, right? And so I think for existing projects today, the limiting factor is like how much context does the AI have and how much can it actually fit into their
Yeah.
context window. And for better or for worse, humans today have way more context and can fit way more into our, context window of our brain.
Yeah. Way more efficient too, right?
Yeah.
But I think to your point earlier, I feel like it's only a matter of time to where AI can absorb all of that context and then get to it way more efficiently. But it is a totally different dynamic, like
Yeah.
very large team versus, hey, I'm doing this greenfield like vibe coding.
Yeah.
thing on the side. But let's get to the models real quick. So SaaS, traditionally, per user, per seat pricing model.
Yep.
Like, do you see the pricing model evolving? And then maybe more broadly, the business model? Because, you think of like traditional build versus buy decisions. I think that equation has changed a lot for companies. But I think companies are still going to want to buy things off the shelf still because it's just easier. You don't have to
Yep.
worry about it. But what's your thoughts there on SaaS pricing and business models?
Yeah, I think SaaS prices will probably compress, and not because you can build it yourself, but because I think there will be a lot more competitors, right? Very concretely, like I have a free tool and it like is kind of competitive with DocuSign, right? Obviously,
Hmm.
I don't make any money today, but you know, I could theoretically steal users away from DocuSign, right? And so I think that could like compress DocuSign's margins. There are a bunch of other DocuSign competitors also, and I'm sure like there will only be more DocuSign competitors. There will only be more Salesforce competitors started today, right?
Hmm.
I don't think build in-house is like too strong of a decision because I've gone through building with Springtime and there's still a lot of stuff that you have to worry about, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is it like the compliance factor? Let's assume I have some like real estate professional sending contracts
Or
through Spring.
legal, like,
Yeah. And they don't,
errors and things like that, right?
yeah. But like you can imagine a real estate agent doesn't want to think about, is this compliant? Is this tool compliant? Do I
Yeah.
have to trust the AI to make sure this is compliant? They want to just be told, hey, XYZ tool is compliant and
Hmm.
we guarantee this, right? And maybe you pay like X dollars a month for that. And so I think there's a lot of those things. And I think there's a lot of like just minor features that are important. But again, like I would probably say I have dedicated 20 to 40 hours total on Springtime. And like if I'm a real estate agent, 20 to 40 hours is like a lot of time. And if we assume time is money, right? A lot of time
Hmm.
and money spent on building this tool when I could just be paying, let's say, $10 a month to some company to go build that tool for me, right? And so I think, yes, they could build it on their own, but I think that economics, if you assume time is money, still doesn't make that much sense to go build it on your own, right?
Yeah.
But then I do think, again, margins will compress because it's easier for anyone to go build a lot of these tools.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think the other angle too, because that was another thing that came up in the comments of the video I did. And I'll kind of share this. It's related in a sense. And this, I don't know if you probably come across Craig Eisenberg, but I think the piece that's interesting here, and the thing people were saying in comments is, oh, free versions of DocuSign have existed for a long time. There's nothing new about, this guy's solution. The thing that's different though is like, A, do you have an audience? And it's almost like marketing and product market fit. Those things become much more important because what happened? Your thing essentially went viral, which gave it exposure,
Yep.
and then you were able to attract users, right? If
Yep.
I just with no audience go out and build, I could build the same thing you just built. But if I have nobody to attract it to, then it's just going to die on the vine. So that becomes so important, and that's a big thing he talks about. But it was funny. He had this tweet. I don't know if did this come before or after you built it. I don't know
I
if
think
you've
this
seen it, but
came
he's talking.
after and a bunch of people tagged me and Springtime into this.
Okay, so you've seen this one where he's
Yeah.
like giving the DocuSign example of a band of vibe coders coming together. And he actually shows, what is this, Google Trends with free DocuSign. And it just keeps growing and going up.
Yeah.
That's funny, yeah. But yeah, so I think that's the piece that becomes really important is, do you have a mechanism? It's really a distribution mechanism at the end of the
Yep.
day.
Yeah. I think there are two things to that. Yes, I think it's like distribution mechanism. Do you have an audience? Can you like go build a viral tweet? But I think there are clear incumbents. Let's assume, DocuSign is like the incumbent in the e-sign world.
Yep.
There are clearly problems with them, right? Like even if they drop their prices, by a lot, like people are still going to search for a free DocuSign tool, right? Or,
Hmm.
maybe I'm just making stuff up. Maybe DocuSign doesn't integrate well with another XYZ tool, right? And people are going to then search for, let's say DocuSign plus XYZ tool, like integration. And if that doesn't show up, maybe your tool, maybe my tool builds that integration a lot
Hmm.
better, right? And so I think, yes, I do think there are marketing distribution advantages, but I also think there will always be product problems where like some
Yeah.
niche use case, like, and just making stuff up, right? Like maybe DocuSign doesn't work well with the real estate agent's workflow because they need to go through, the MLS and maybe needing to go through like their mortgage provider, and like the DocuSign, for whatever reason doesn't work well with that. Well, maybe you can go build a,
Mm-hmm.
e-sign tool that works really well for a real estate agent's workflow, right? Or worked really well for,
Yeah.
I don't know, healthcare professionals workflow when they have to, go onboard a new patient or something, right? I don't know. Is DocuSign HIPAA compliant? If it's not, I can imagine DocuSign HIPAA compliance is like another Google search term that like could be
Mm-hmm.
another fruitful area to go build a product in.
Yeah. And I think that first principles thinking of what's the saying, the riches are in the niches, becomes a lot easier to serve very
Yeah.
specific niches in a sense with AI. And you don't need like the whole VC side. You don't got to go raise a bunch of money to start stuff now, which I think that's going
Yep.
to change a lot of things. But yeah, maybe to wrap us up here, I'm curious because you're at Stripe on the product side. Is there anything cool that y'all are doing on the AI side or agent side or how you work or stuff that's like public knowledge? I think there was something about y'all doing something on the agent side. What was it with perplexity or something? But any kind of cool
Yeah.
things you can share of how y'all are playing with things at Stripe?
Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff internally that I can't share just yet, but
Yeah.
I think one of the coolest ones that I am excited about is the one that you mentioned, Perplexity plus Stripe. It's specifically, excuse me, a AI agent on the Perplexity side that can help you shop, help you make decisions. And then I believe Stripe plugs in and we can help obviously purchase that product, right? With your credit card or your bank account or whatever other payment method.
Yeah.
And I think like this will be super interesting because like for me, for example, like I almost want, like, I hate shopping and specifically shopping for things that are like low value to me, but like things I need. I don't know, just as an
Toilet
example, like
paper.
yeah, toilet paper. I need to Drano like my sink, right? The other day, and I wish I could just type into an AI agent, find me a Drano that will not harm my pipes, right? But is good
Mm-hmm.
for, I don't know, let's say getting rid of hair and is under like $10, right? And will
Yep.
get to me like today or tomorrow. Like those are basically all my requirements for what I care about in the product. And like, I don't
Yeah.
want to go through Amazon and look at the product details page and look at the reviews. Like I just want AI to figure all that stuff out for me, read my mind, so to speak, after I tell it, the requirements and then purchase that. And then best case,
Mm-hmm.
the AI also Dranos my sink for me, right? But unfortunately, I have to do that
Yeah. It's
today.
sort of figure comes
Yeah.
in and they get the humanoid robot.
Yeah. I would love that. But like at least it can help reduce, let's assume I spend 15 minutes evaluating and shopping and reading reviews and then buying the right, Drano or clog pipe thing. And that could be 15 minutes of my time that gets
Yeah.
freed up with Perplexity and Stripe.
Yeah, when I've been playing with some of these agent tools, Manus and Convert Proxy by Convergence is another cool free one. And then you
Mhm.
got Operator by OpenAI. But I don't know why, but my default test is go buy me toilet paper on Amazon and see if it can do it. But I think the cool thing here is I'm just reading through this, like allotting single-use debit cards. That's kind of like an interesting way of thinking about it because I'm assuming that's a way to like the agent not like going rogue and like doing all these different things if it's kind of like a single-use thing in a sense. That's kind of a neat way of thinking about it from a system standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think like we will have to figure out, we as in the whole industry, not just Stripe, we'll have to figure out like how do we make sure that, the AI doesn't go rogue and spends all your money, that it's like an
Yeah.
actual purchase that you yourself want to confirm, right? Or like that you mean to buy, right? And that, for example, credit card companies are also okay with it. I assume Stripe is, I'm not specifically focused on that work stream, but I assume Stripe is like figuring out what the future of AI plus like Visa and
Yeah.
MasterCard and American Express look like too, right? So I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of like stuff and like payment stuff that like Stripe needs to figure out, but I'm confident we'll get there.
Nice. Well, Michael, this was awesome getting to talk some AI. We got to have you on a live vibe coding session at some
Yeah.
point to just go deeper. But where can people find you? Where can they find Springtime if they need a e-sign tool?
Yeah. For me, I think Twitter is probably the easiest place. I am Twitter at Asian Mike with a Z. So AZIAN Mike. And then Springtime is just Springtime with a Y. So instead of Spring spelled with an I, it's spelled with a Y, springtime.com. And I think those
Awesome.
are the two best places.
Awesome. Well, yeah, and make sure you catch the Y for folks who want to go find
Yeah.
springtime. Awesome, Michael. Appreciate you joining.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks for listening to the Talking AI podcast. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave us a review. We love those. For more info on Talking AI, visit talkingaipodcast.com.